Welcome back to another episode of A Time to Think, series we're calling Media Diet. Pastor Christopher Tillman pastors a church in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. You referred to Stevens Point and Wausau as the Twin Cities recently.
You can say that,
the smaller twins, like diminutive
Romulus
twins.
and Remus.
Yeah. And I'm in Wausau, Wisconsin, Pastor Josh Holland. A Time to Think is a place where we can thoughtfully, carefully respond to and engage with these important issues in the culture that also bleed into the church. We believe that the culture around us, the water we swim in, so to speak, is going to affect us in the church as well. And so oftentimes the lessons we hope the culture would learn, we also need to learn as Christians. So we're a culture saturated with media. Chris, we've been talking about media for a number of hours already today. And I don't know about you, but I'm ready to turn my brain off for a little while.
Yeah.
Just turn it off, right?
Yeah, we got meetings later on, so we can do that after we're done here.
Yeah.
But what does it really mean to turn our brains off, Josh?
Well, you hear people, I think that's a pretty common colloquialism these days. I just want to turn off. I just want to kind of not think anymore. I want to do something that distracts me. And so we're calling this last episode Turning Off, because we've already had, this is our fourth T. We've had time, telos, which means purpose of media, temperament, we discussed last time, what is media doing to us, and now turning off. And the focus of this episode, Chris, is it's kind of a conundrum.
What is a conundrum, Josh?
That question is itself a conundrum. The conundrum is we live in a society that probably has more leisure time than any society in human history.
Yep.
And yet we're exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
That's the conundrum.
Yeah.
And I think the problem within that is we spend our leisure time engaged primarily in technology, which we think on a day-to-day basis that if we could turn our brains off and distract ourselves primarily using technology, then we would actually get the rest that we deserve. But we find over time that we're still not rested. We're still exhausted. We're still wearied. And so that presents a conundrum. How can we have so much leisure time? And you might think, I don't have that much leisure time. Well, what I mean by that is if you were in an agrarian society, you might work 80-hour work weeks.
Right.
Sun up to sundown, 6.5 days a week. But generally, we find it inappropriate if an employer makes you work more than 55,
55.
And if you're working 55,
35,
well, if you're working 55, you better be making a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly.
So probably 40 to 45, which means that almost every night you have time at your disposal and you have weekends at your disposal, 2-day weekends. And so that's what I mean by leisure time. It's non-work time.
Yeah.
But we tend to busy ourselves. And I think a lot of the busyness is with media. We think about our first episode on time, which is, Friday comes and you're spending your whole week thinking, I can't wait to get to Friday. And then all of a sudden it's Sunday night. And
where'd the weekend go?
Go? Well, if we step back and we noticed how much time we spent watching football or movies or whatever, that probably starts to explain. We got to the weekend. We thought the way for me to get rest this weekend, to turn off, is to
tune in.
To tune in, that's good. Tune in to turn off. And then all of a sudden the weekend's gone and we actually haven't gotten the rest that we so badly wanted.
Yeah, and I think we can extend this for the purpose of our conversation. We can extend this not just to media, but I know it's very common for people to take vacations with the intent of being rested. And they come back and they say, I need a vacation for my vacation because I'm not rested at all. I thought getting away was going to help me feel more peaceful, joyful, all these types of things. And I just feel more wired than ever. So what do you think is the similar thread that exists between our turning off by tuning in, our turning off by engaging in a vacation? Is there anything you think that's consistent across both of those platforms that we seek to use for the purpose of relaxing that really doesn't seem to actually relax us?
Three thoughts. Three. One is generally I get to ask you the open-ended questions that make you think.
Yeah, well, I'm doing it now.
Reversing course here. You're learning, young Padawan. And second is the first thread I see is it seems like we don't know what rest is. Because if we're pursuing things that are causing us not to find rest, that's coming from some sort of, we don't actually know what true rest is, so we're going elsewhere to get it. It's like not knowing what true sacrificial love is, so we keep ending up in bad relationships.
Sure. Yep.
And we're like, why do I keep doing this to myself? Well, we
Yep.
don't actually know what the true form is.
Mhm.
And then the third thought, because I must be a Puritan, I can't ever just have
Oh,
one.
you need more than 2.
I have 9 thoughts here,
Good.
Chris. The third one is stimulation.
Yeah.
Generally, our vacations are filled with stimulation.
Mhm.
We were talking off air about Disney World. That's just like that's got to be the most stimulating vacation possible, right?
I
It's
imagine.
just
Yeah.
lights and colors and attractions and.
Yep.
But I mean, if you're getting away, right,
Mhm.
and you're gonna go to London, you might never go to London again.
Right.
If you're gonna go to a place that you're never gonna go to again, darn well better fill it with some stuff you're never gonna get to do again.
Mhm.
And so you have to pack and stimulate and
Yep.
fill your time.
Yep.
So maybe as I'm just talking through that, one of the similarities would be lack of downtime,
Okay.
lack of unfilled space.
Mhm. Mhm.
Anything you're seeing in that regard? Because that would be the same with our weekends, right?
Yeah.
If we're filling it with media consumption or filling our weeknights with media consumption, or I would say also our mornings. Because as I'm thinking about the lack of rest we see in our culture, I'm thinking mornings, evenings, weekends,
Yeah.
non-work time. And I think we generally fill all that space with some sort of stimulating engagement with
Yeah.
a movie or social media.
Excuse me. I think something that might be related to this, and I'm going to try to think out loud with it.
Okay.
But I think that the common thread that I see running through those things is that I think we're afraid to actually using the word of stimulation. I think we're afraid of not being stimulated, right? I think we're afraid of saying that our time of relaxation and rest was not, and this kind of seems strange based on what we talked about in the previous episode, but it wasn't productive. And so we think of productivity in terms of, does it produce happiness? Okay, in our culture, producing happiness is the most productive thing that you can actually do. If you're producing happiness for somebody, I mean, how often is it that people talk about ethical questions when we bring up issues of human sexuality? It's like, well, it doesn't hurt anybody, and if they're happy, right? If they're happy, and so that's the judging matrix that we pass things through. You think, okay, well, if somebody's happy, then that's good. And so when we think about what is downtime, effectively, downtime is something that's produced happiness. And when we then start evaluating things that we put into that place of producing happiness, what is it to turn off by tuning in? What is it to turn off by vacationing out? Promises of happiness get made on the basis of appealing to, I think, our very narrow, very individualized, very uniquely established preferences. So a vacation might be something that you feel like, oh, this is going to make me so happy. This will make me happy. There's a promise that says this will make me happy. And so you take the vacation and you try to fill the time with everything that you think is going to make you happy. And we talk about cruise ships.
And not
right?
even, not even to just lambast people who go elsewhere for
Sure.
vacation, but if you take a week off of work in order to do house projects,
Yeah.
Yep. This will finally, I'll get ahead.
Yep.
Finally, I'll get this done.
Exactly.
And it's the same type of, what it is vacation really means time away from work, but it doesn't always mean time to rest.
Yeah. It's time to do what I really want to do.
Yeah.
It's time to do what I really wish I could be doing in the rest of the other time. Now, there's nothing wrong necessarily with that because there's time for recreation.
Which is the booger
right?
here, isn't it? It's easy to just say it's either all or nothing. I can do everything or I can do nothing. And we're continually trying to say some of these things are fine, but you have to okay, how much time am I spending on those types of vacation? How much time am I spending?
Yep.
There's a sliding scale here.
Yeah, there is, and so we don't want to advocate for a life of supposedly selfless asceticism, where somebody is just saying, my goal is to be miserable because that means I'm not being trivial with how I use time. I'm not just participating in this society. And at the other hand, we don't want to be guilty of what is the predominant trend in our society, which is to kind of live it up.
Hmm.
It's YOLO. That's
Right.
the attitude we take towards checking out is, well, you only live once, so find things to do that are going to just, make that moment for you. And so I think my observation is for, I think, people who are my age and a little bit younger, um, a lot of what would have been constituted as, and this engages with social media piece, what would have been looked at in the past as, I can think about my growing up years, and I didn't grow up in a poor family by any stretch. Both my parents were teachers. We had enough. There was no problem. But we didn't go on vacations all the time.
Hmm.
Even my dad had the entire summer off. I think one of the most satisfying realities about my growing up is the fact that my dad was home in
Hmm.
the summertime. Like I could be around my dad. I mean, that was great. So thanks, Dad, for having that job and being able to be there with us. But when I think about family trips that we took a few trips that were really meaningful to me. But as I look back on it, it wasn't meaningful because we had this whole list of things that we had to do in order for it to be successful.
Hmm.
It was, we're going as a family to this place. We're going to do some things, but really at the end of the day, the real treasure of that vacation was that we get away from the things that have been probably consuming our attention,
Right.
generally speaking, and we go to a place where we can just have a good time together. And so as social media and culture has developed over the years and everything, one of the things that I've noticed is that vacations have turned into advertisements, not necessarily for a travel company, but for your life. And so you might take a vacation down to, uh, you know, Bill's Amusement Park. I'm not going to throw any amusement parks under those. Just say Bill's Amusement Park. You might take it there. You have to get pictures of everything. You have to get pictures of
Hmm.
your kid doing this, your kid doing that. And the question is, like, can it be enough for you to just enjoy that time with your child?
Yeah.
Can that not be enough? And again, there's nothing wrong with taking a picture of your kid going on a roller coaster. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But then you just take this step back and think, am I feeling though this satisfaction comes because I've taken a picture? Or can I say I'm genuinely going to enjoy my time, even if I can't prove to other people that
Hmm.
this has produced a certain happiness that everybody else is supposedly experiencing at the same time?
Yeah.
And so there's this pressure that gets placed on us when we think about how do we check out, and we are more checked in those moments probably than ever because
Hmm.
we're trying
So we're
to
trying. That's a
yeah, we're
good.
trying to prove to ourselves and we're trying to prove to other people that we really are having fun. It's kind of
Yeah.
like gritting your teeth, really enjoying this, really enjoying this, really enjoying this.
Yeah.
When honestly, the most enjoyable times you can probably have. I mean, I think relationally, the most enjoyable times I have. I mean, I have great memories of going on trips with friends and everything, and going church trips to baseball games and stuff. But man, I love just being around
Yeah.
people.
So the common threading there is the feel that when you get time off, right? It needs to be you need to be doing something and
Fill
doing
it.
something of value
Yep.
and filling your time. And there's this inherent pressure to do that. But you said something as you're supposed to be checked out, you're as checked in as ever. Because the thing that is causing you not to be restful is not necessarily that you have a job,
Right.
but it might be the constant media consumption. And I think that's true just even on our week to week life. It's I can't wait so I can check out this weekend, but then I'm constantly in front of stimulating media. So I've never
Hmm.
actually checked out. And it just reminds me of our past episode about temperament, where um, we have to see all types of media as fundamentally a stimulation,
Sure.
which means if we're trying to turn off, I mean, there's a reason that you can be exhausted and stay up on your phone for an hour
Hmm.
because it's stimulating you.
Yeah.
So just by nature of that, it's light coming at your face,
Right.
it's moving pictures,
Yep.
it's entertaining. Just by nature of that, if we're saying I'm going to turn off to get rest by being stimulated, it's like saying I'm so tired I want to take a nap, so I'm going to drink coffee.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a fundamental disconnect there, um, and I think I guess I would say this because I find it appropriate to have times of leisure. I've talked to you and talked on this podcast about the Sunday afternoon feeling.
Hmm.
It's super helpful for me to. I had a really enjoyable time a couple weeks ago. I'm in a funky headspace on Sunday afternoons. So if you're in our church, pray for me between 12 and 5 on Sundays. I just get really nervous about everything I've said and about what people
Hmm.
think about me. And so it is valuable for me to have a period of time to watch football or something like that. So I went on a run and I listened to the Titans game on radio, and it was super enjoyable. It took me out of spiritual things for a moment. And so totally advocate for times in your week where you can just enjoy
Yep.
something, whether it's a sporting event or a play or whatever you're enjoying. Um, I think the problem is when we think that that's rest, because it's not rest.
Hmm.
It's not. It's
Hmm.
a distraction, and sometimes distractions can be helpful.
Yeah.
Sometimes distractions can even let you think more clearly later on because they take you out of the
Sure.
immediacy of the moment, but they are fundamentally not rest.
Hmm.
And that's where I think we have a misconception, and why we're so tired all the time is because we keep thinking that we're going to be rested if we can turn our brains off,
Yeah.
and we're not, because we're getting stimulated.
Hmm.
And so the same thing that's true with the vacation is true with the media, is we think we can be rested if we can do this, but the thing we're doing is still keeping us on the wheel, still
Yep.
keeping us in the rat race. Um, and and so I'm just going to say media by nature is not restful.
Hmm.
Television by nature is not restful. Devices by nature is not restful. They are as stimulating as a cup of coffee. And
That's
if we're
because they're intended to produce a response.
right, so we need to then find rest elsewhere. And I would say that means we need to find significant pockets of our week without devices. Because if devices are inherently not rest and we need rest, then that means we need not devices,
Yeah.
right? And so my wife and I, we practice Sabbath on Fridays, and we talk about three forms of rest: physical rest, emotional psychological rest, and
Hmm.
spiritual rest. Spiritual rest is primary here. This is one thing I think no one talks about, is that when you need to be rested, the primary thing you need is spiritual rest. Because
What is that, Josh? What is spiritual rest?
it is the peace that comes with being reconciled to the living God.
Hmm.
I was talking to some teenagers about the biblical view of rest, and right before I talked with them, we sang a song, very simple chorus, said, "Christ is enough. Everything I need is in you.
Hmm.
Christ is enough. Everything I need is in you." And I told them that you will get more rest from singing that in 30 seconds than you will from a weekend
Hmm.
playing games.
Hmm.
And the reason, Chris, is because you and I, our inner monologues, our hearts, our souls are constantly thinking, I'm not enough.
Yeah.
I don't have enough. I can't do enough. I'm not enough. I can't do enough. I don't have enough. I
Hmm.
mean, those are three core fundamental anxieties that
And
we
they're
have.
exhausting.
And
Yeah.
they're exhausting, man.
Yeah.
And then you sing, Christ is enough. Everything I need is in you.
Yeah.
And so spiritual rest comes in believing spiritual truths about what Christ has done for me. That in Jesus Christ, God has taken the burden of my sin. He has washed my soul. He has adopted me into his family. He has given me his spirit so that I can be connected and a part of his divine nature. He has given me an inheritance as his son so that he promises to ransom me finally from this kingdom of darkness. So we've got the promises of God, we've got the family of God, we've got the love of God, the steadfastness of God, the forgiveness of God. And spiritual rest comes in reminding ourselves of those truths.
Yeah.
And I said this in our service on Sunday, you have the it is done at the cross,
Yeah.
and you have the it is done in the new creation.
Mm-hmm.
At the cross, God says, it is done. The sacrifice has been offered. Sin has been atoned for. You have been cleaned. The it is done in Revelation is the earth is restored. Sin is eradicated.
Yep.
The serpent is crushed. And the problem is we live in between the it is dones, but they still exist.
Yep.
The it is done of the cross is still so true. The it is done in Revelation is still so true. And what we do when we spiritually rest is we rehearse and remind ourselves of spiritual truths.
Yeah.
So that when you come in on a Monday and you're anxious because church attendance was down,
Yeah.
Chris, your it is done was already,
You You can rest.
Both "it is done" still exist.
Yep.
And so that's a huge component of rest that our culture and most of our churches are missing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when my wife and I practice Sabbath, that's a big component of it, is we have to know how each of us is prone to spiritual
Yeah.
idolatry and worry,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to preach to one another. And we sing.
Mm.
We sing so that our hearts can proclaim Christ is enough. Everything I need is in Christ. Because when we're resting, we're not producing anything.
Right.
We're not being enough for anybody.
That's scary to us.
And so Christ has to be enough.
Yeah.
What we find is Christ is enough. So that's the spiritual rest component. Media's not giving me that. The emotional, psychological rest component has to do with having times where we're not stimulated.
Yeah.
And so it involves things like putting the phone in the other room, or spending dedicated time not watching television, spending it out in the Lord's creation, or exercising. And so both of those things, I think, are so necessary for us to truly rest.
Yeah.
What else do you think is necessary as we think about true rest?
Maybe this is just a particular bent that I have, but I find that relationship helps me rest. I'm an extrovert, so I don't like being by myself, right? But I think that we find a certain degree of fulfillment when we realize that we are not the center of the universe. And not just on a macrocosmic biblical Jesus is the king level, but on the level of, as we relate to other people, we realize I get fulfilled by giving of myself. Just like I find rest in not being stimulated by all of the, like, how strange is it that we feel like we can make our lives more restful by being more busy? By being more active spiritually.
Yeah.
Saying like, okay, well, if I just try hard enough, do enough, get God to really approve of me, then I can rest spiritually. It doesn't work that way. Like, there's a rest that God has given to his people, and that's found in genuinely resting in what his son has done. So leaving it there. When it comes to just this idea of, how relationship functions with rest, is to say, man, there's rest to be found by giving of yourself. I think that it is when we glut ourselves on being the center of our own lives, and this is where I think the media component plays into this. The media tries to convince you that you can choose whatever you want, do whatever you want, whenever you want. You can stream this, stream that, enjoy this, enjoy that. And there's nothing ultimately wrong with just watching some TV shows for yourself. But when you take a step back and you think relationally, I can feel rested. I can feel whole when I am not looking at somebody else as a hindrance to my productivity, as a hindrance to my personal satisfaction. Like, I'll use an example from, like, there's some TV shows that I really like watching, and then we'll invite people over sometimes. And there's this conflict in my head. I'm like, maybe I can just watch it with them. They can watch the show with them. Like, they don't really like that show, and those who are listening who've been over to my house, moments you've probably thought that about me in the past.
When Chris is twitching.
Where I've been, little.
Figure out
how do I do this?
Which option do I take?
Yeah, and been a little bit more insensitive to that. But when I think, okay, here's time that I can just be refreshed because I'm not being self-focused. I'm not being self-driven. I can actually look at other people and say, I'm glad you're here. And to just let that be enough in that moment. And we think about the rest of God and how pleasing it was to God within the council of the Trinity, between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, to look upon his creation before sin entered the world and say it is good. And to enjoy that together, and to rest together, and to look at the goodness of that together. And I do think there's a relational component that's appropriate. I know that there are times to be alone, and to be alone with God, but that's still a relational reality.
Yeah.
You're not just checking out because any non-Christian can just go be by themselves in the woods.
Yeah.
But for the Christian,
I was
it's to
listening
say,
to one professor was arguing that Sabbath in the Christian worldview necessitates the people of God.
yeah,
So you are to rest with the people
together.
of God.
Yeah. And that's, for our purposes as pastors, like one of the reasons Sunday mornings are so important is because, and I've had these moments. There've been guys, and I'm not tempted to do this necessarily because I'm preaching at the time, but Sunday morning football games and teams are playing in London or something.
Mm-hmm.
Guys who are just thinking, oh, I gotta watch this, gotta watch this, gotta watch. And it's like, no, you don't.
Mm-hmm.
You can find deeper satisfaction, fulfillment by being with the people of God, present, tuned out of this, tuned out of your media, tuned out of these things, and just recognizing together that this is more important. And I think, bringing this conversation somewhat full circle to when we started with triviality, we see that relationship as it pertains to restfulness, it is the antithesis of triviality,
Mm-hmm.
because people matter. They
Yeah.
matter in God's economy, and they matter to how we experience life in a way that is truly fulfilling.
Yeah.
You can't find a fulfilled life on your own. You just can't do that. So Sunday mornings, that's an opportunity for people to gather and to just look at each other and be like, this is good, what God has made. And I think I could be here forever, and it
Mm-hmm.
would be good. It would be good, and it would be restful and refreshing to me. And that's why I just advocate so strongly for people who
Well, and by
experience that.
nature, turning off, even if my wife and I say we just want to turn our brains off and we go watch something together, we might be doing it together, but the purpose of it is to disengage. So it's the opposite of engaging with
Sure.
one another. And I guess as I'm listening to you, listening to me, I would say there's a place in our week for just wanting to turn our brains off. I think it's a very minor place in our week.
Mm.
I think it's a tool in our tool belt we should use pretty rarely.
Mm.
Because oftentimes the things we want to turn our brains off from, the worries of the week, the cares of the world, if we met those head on, figured out why they cause so much anxiety in our heart, why they cause so much worry, and then we entered into a true spiritual rest, knowing that Christ has taken care of or will take care of those things. I mean, it's the financial issues that are causing us worry, and we really meet those head on to meet the God in prayer who knows what we need before we
Yeah.
ask, and who cares about the hairs numbered on our head and has provided everything for us in Christ. And how will he not with Christ then therefore give us all things? And he's and we meet those head on and we find true spiritual rest there.
Yeah.
We find less and less and less and less and less we need to turn our brains off.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't need to escape those problems.
Right.
We actually have a better, truer rest.
Yeah.
And then when we do want to turn off, so to speak, we say, oh, it's actually more beneficial for me to turn off by leaving the media beside. And so I guess I would advocate a couple little things. If you're feeling the need to, I don't know, to turn off, instead of going to watch television, go on a walk, or read a book.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'll mention this again, it is so weird that we end our days playing on a phone that will keep us awake
up.
when we're tired. Yeah. If you open a book and you fall asleep reading it, you should probably be asleep. And I do think this becomes really pervasive, where it's, all right, so we make a habit of watching TV until we're exhausted after dinner, so we go to bed later than we should, so we wake up later than we should, so our day is immediately started off in some sort of hectic pace because we don't wake up naturally, and when we do wake up, we're trying to catch up on what we missed while we were asleep, and then the kids get up, and then we get them to school, and then we're at work, and then we come home, and then we put them down, and we're exhausted, so we watch TV, which means we stay up later than we should, so then
A cycle has developed.
And then we get to the weekend, and I just think, man, what would happen if most days of the week we read a book instead? And then we naturally went to bed 45 minutes to an hour earlier. And then we naturally woke up earlier, and instead of being on our phones, we spent time in prayer or with the Lord or exercising. And then we weren't hurried, so we didn't feel as exhausted, so we didn't need to turn our brains off. Yeah. And I do think there's some little things we can decide to do over the course of our days that lead us to having less and less and less of that feeling of, I just want to escape from this. See if I have anything else that's pertinent here. If I don't, then if I have to search for something, it's probably time to just go. Yeah, so I my last advocation is, we talked about purpose. Let's purpose times in our week where we are away from all forms of media. Because if we don't, we're not going to just stumble upon being away.
Yeah.
you know? So I think that's a big deal. Chris, thanks for taking some time to think.
Yeah, we'll see you guys with our next series.
Yeah.